All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 18 of Blue Leadership with your host, Dennis Nair. Dennis is a 26-year law enforcement veteran and retired chief from the state of New York. He's also a proud graduate of the 240th session of the FBI National Academy and the 61st session of the FBI LEDA Command Institute. The Blue Leadership video podcast is brought to you by the nationally ranked Master of Science in Law Enforcement and Public Safety Leadership program at the University of San Diego. You can learn more about the LEPSL program at criminaljustice.sandiego.edu. And with that, I'll kick things over to your host to introduce our featured guest.
Sarah, thank you. Great to be back. And today's guest, we have recently retired Chief Steve Watson from the Eureka, California Police Department. Chief Watson spent 27 years of public service, 3 years in the Army, and then 24 years in law enforcement. He spent his first 7 years with the Santa Cruz Police Department, and then he finished up his career with the city of Eureka, California, and the last 4 years as chief. And in that time as chief, it was during some of the toughest times with the pandemic, civil unrest, and many other things that go with it. Chief Watson is a proud graduate of the University of San Diego's Law Enforcement and Public Safety Leadership Master's Program, and he's going to be a great guest. So without further ado, Chief Watson, thanks for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Chief.
Absolutely. And my first question is at what point in your career, obviously it's a long career, 24 years in law enforcement, at what point did you decide that the trajectory you wanted was to be the police chief?
You know, that certainly wasn't how I started out my career. I thought being a sergeant was the best job in law enforcement. I absolutely loved it. But I attended the Sherman Block Supervisory Leadership Institute through California Post. And that really opened my eyes to leadership at the next level, where I began to kind of understand and have a yearning to advance policing. And I realized that as you climb through the ranks, you get more opportunities for that long-term impact. And so that's really what started it. And it just kind of was a natural progression from there. I was a reluctant captain when it was time to put in for that. But again, ultimately, I looked at, could I make a difference at a different level? And I certainly look back and feel that I have, and I hope that others do too.
You know, that's mirrors very, very much how my trajectory was, because sergeant to me was the best job. You're in the trenches, so to speak, with the troops. You're there still doing the job you signed up to do. You're a bridge to the administration. And like you, it was just an evolution. And what I wound up always having a mentor. And I was going to ask you as a follow-up, did you have mentors along your way, or a mentor that helped you in that progression?
You know, from time to time, one of the sad realities, I guess, of my experience and often our profession is at times I learned more from bad leaders or evil managers than I did from good ones. And so I had plenty of those examples as well. But I also had some outstanding leaders that I served under. A chief from San Diego, Andy Mills, was the one that promoted me to captain. And I would like to look at him as a mentor. I learned a lot from him in the 3.5 years that he was our chief. And then I stepped into his job.
That's amazing. And I'm sure a leader such as yourself set the path really well for the next person who's now taking over your department or in whatever the administrative roles. So I'm sure that's a huge part of your legacy.
Something I like to tell, our people was when you're giving a new opportunity or assignment, you can either merely occupy that office or you can elevate it and make it better than you found it. And so that's what I've tried to do through my career. I've had my missteps as well, but I'd like to look back and believe that the legacy that we left during our times as chief was that we elevated the position in our departments and also mentored and trained those that we worked alongside so that they can do better than we did in advanced policing.
For sure. And, as we speak about advancing policing, you did a lot with what we call that tragic triad of homelessness, mental health, substance abuse, and addiction. And can you just talk a little bit about some of the things you did for the city of Eureka and maybe some of the successes you saw through your concepts?
You bet. Homelessness has been a problem in this country, obviously, for decades, but it certainly has accelerated in the last 10 years and became one of the foremost problems, if not the number one problem in our communities. And California has obviously the largest population, I think around 40 million residents. In 2020, our homeless population was over 161,000 individuals, and over 70% of those were unsheltered. Those numbers are staggering. And Eureka is the epicenter for Humboldt County. It's in the far northern end of the state. And we have a disproportionately high homelessness rate. And I don't remember the exact percentage compared to the rest of the state, but it's staggering, really. And so as a city, we're trying to navigate homelessness, over the last decade. Like many other jurisdictions, we were enforcement heavy. Because that's what we do. We're law enforcement, right? We're not social workers. We're not, these other specialists in homelessness. Well, we had to become specialists in homelessness because you can't arrest your way out of this problem. There's not enough handcuffs, nor would we want to, because being homeless is not a crime. Their behavior may sometimes result in crimes, but being homeless is not a crime. And so we had to, and this transition happened right about the time I became chief, take a different approach to our response to homelessness. Some things under the former chief were starting to head in the right direction. We had started a mobile intervention and services team. It's an innovative co-responder team. It was one of the early ones in the country, as far as we're aware, where we paired officers with licensed mental health clinicians and case workers to go out where the homeless actually are, not where you want them to be, and try to get them an earlier integrated intervention. So that started under the previous chief. I expanded on the program and created another one called the Community Safety Engagement Team that wrapped the MISS program into it. And this was dedicated, led by a sergeant. So you had that champion, that supervisor, and then we had a sworn park ranger or foot beat officer in our historic district, and a second sworn park ranger that were all part of the program, and some part-time people as well. And so all they did, their job was to work with the homeless. Yes, control behavior and hold people accountable, because you have to balance with anyone compassion and accountability. And
Right.
if you have all accountability measures with no compassion, it's kind of tyranny at that point. And so finding that balance, again, building relationships among the homeless community, advocates, and other stakeholders. Like we're very close with the director of our local homeless rescue, homeless shelter, as well as a local amazing woman named Betty Chen, who serves the homeless, a nonprofit, and close partnerships with hers and others, with the county, Health and Human Services. Those relationships are absolutely crucial. And so we really swung the pendulum from an enforcement-based approach to outreach and services. And it's made a big difference. We still have a significant homeless problem, but we've made some headway, and we've created some important relationships, and we've got many, many people into permanent housing and other services and treatment that they need. You mentioned the tragic triad. That's homelessness, addiction, and mental illness. And if you can't address things like the mental illness component and the addiction component, you're never going to get upstream of the problem, figure out why people are falling in the river. I believe that's a quote from the Archbishop Desmond Tutu. So rather than just pulling out downstream and dealing with the problems that you have, how can we get upstream with our approach and prevent people from spiraling into homelessness? Can we help with our community partners treat the addiction and mental illness? Our own surveys of our homeless, over 50% self-identified as having a mental illness, having received treatment and medication and whatnot. And I believe the numbers were 70-something% for drug abuse, alcohol abuse, one or the other or both together. And these issues are often co-occurring. So that's just the tip of the iceberg. The city expanded to where they have something called Uplift Eureka now. It closely partners with our CSET team. Those are civilians, non-sworn, working for a different department within the city. And again, on that outreach and case management, they have co-pilots that are assigned to work, many of them volunteers, with homeless individuals and families and help them navigate the process. Sometimes it's as simple as getting an ID or a copy of a birth certificate that is holding them back from work or housing. And so helping them through that process, making their doctor's appointments, the treatment that they need for mental illness and addiction and things like that. There's a lot more to it. That's just a little bit, but it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack there. I mean, as we're just listening, we're talking about harm reduction, and that's really a key theme in like how we police across the country. How do we do the least harm through the jobs that we do? And then you're also talking about relational policing through the relationships with those co-responder models, which is amazing. And then the other thing is, you're right, they all feed off of one another. The mental illness connects with the homelessness, and the homelessness sometimes creates the mental illness, and then goes along with that is substance abuse. And one of the main themes that was coming out of all of reimagining of policing was really to avoid the enforcement efforts of police being involved in things that they're not best qualified to do. And that's really managing mental health issues and homeless issues and addiction. And the fact that you found ways to do that through those relationships with co-responders and through addressing it in a compassionate way, I think that's huge. And I know you could probably talk about it for quite a bit of length, but that's amazing what the focus you and your agency put on it.
We went from nearly 1,400 citations to homeless individuals in a 1-year period at its peak to less than 100. As we're trying to find other avenues, we started a diversion program to help keep the homeless out of the criminal justice system for minor offenses where they're not going to get any jail time anyways. Throw some more fines and fees on them. They can't pay it anyways. And so it doesn't make any sense. It's insane. So yeah, we find ourselves policing the gaps in a broken and under-resourced system. And we have a seat at the table in law enforcement, even though homelessness is not the function of law enforcement, just the conduct issues and crimes. Now we have to take a leadership role. And I think most agencies have realized that, and that's what they're doing and what they've done.
Yeah, and what comes out really clearly and strong is just the compassionate approach. And so for the listeners and viewers, they don't know if we didn't cover it in your intro, but before you were a police officer and your time in the military, you also have studies in ministry and teaching. And do you think that played a role in the compassionate approach you brought forward, and or maybe in like on the macro scale in just your overall leadership?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I have almost more of a liberal arts background. My first degree was in church leadership, so there are theology components and ministry and counseling and other things that went into that. Then I pursued a teaching credential with the 5th-year credentialing program, so there's that educational component. And I'll tell you a true story about that briefly here in a minute. And so I went overseas a few times on some outreach programs, Guatemala, Romania, and India, and Mexico. And those were amazing times that changed my life and my perspective. Certainly, it's easy to become very cynical and jaded in the profession of law enforcement, and I have been guilty of that at times. But I've grown. And so, yes, that background has kind of shaped my perspective and the way that I approach policing, especially in the later half of my career.
So academics is huge, and that's actually really starting to gain traction nationally for not just training of law enforcement, but higher academic studies, because it creates critical thinking and it broadens your mind and it allows a person to, understand things at a theoretical level and the science behind things. And so you pursued and completed your master's toward the end of your career. And I guess my next question is, was that part of a plan for the next chapter, or did you just realize always the value of continued education?
Both and more. And, it's better to start late than never, right? But life needs to be about lifelong learning. And I saw this as an opportunity to grow as a person, as in a leader. I was a serving chief of police when I began the LEPSL program. In fact, I think over a year of my time in the 20 months in the program, I was still actively working, about 13, 14 months. It had not originally intended to retire quite so soon. It just was a confluence of events in the right time for me and my family, to kind of step away from the active service as a chief and look towards chapter 2. and other ways that I could advance the profession of policing and serve our communities. And so that was part of it. I wanted to set an example for people in my department because I believe education is very, very important. And in fact, in California, increased levels of education are going to be required for all police officers with some new laws, a new law that was introduced. One of the officers I work with, the one that actually runs that CSET program I told you about, was earning his bachelor's and then his master's degree around this time. And so I thought, well, he's getting his master's. It's time. It was on my bucket list. Is the other thing. I've always wanted to complete my master's. I had almost enough to do it in education 20-something years ago and didn't take it across the finish line, and I've regretted that in that time. So I spent several years looking for the perfect program, happened to stumble across the LEPSL program, and it was like a perfect fit. Literally, I could not be happier with the institution, the University of San Diego, and with the program. It gets my highest marks, and I'm constantly being an ambassador now, telling people about the program and hoping some more people will participate because it's extremely impactful.
Right. And similarly, I found it is so relevant. And I've said this so many times that I felt like I had a LEPSL camera following me because I'd be studying things, and I was, as a chief, able to apply that because I was finishing the program while I was still a chief during such tumultuous times, and everything has just this high level of relevance, whether it's like the public safety law classes or, the community engagements or the budgeting. It's just everything made sense. And so that was my running joke, was that I felt like I was being watched because it all aligned with what I was doing on the practical level. And for you, my segue is you actually use your LEPSL 520 class paper final project for a community program. Can you just talk a little bit about how you turned a final project for the master's program into something for your community?
Yeah, so what you spoke to, Chief, is the magic of the LEPSL program, the real world application. It is contemporary issues that can plug and play right now in your job, whether you're a sergeant or an officer, a deputy, a captain, a chief going through the program. You literally can take the lessons learned in many of the assignments and they fit into the work that you're doing, that your department's doing. So in this case, we had to do a report to the community on 21st century policing, and that covered the 6 pillars of President Obama's 21st century policing initiative. And it was one of the more fun assignments that we had. And I'd wanted to do something like this. A city council member had asked me, are we a 21st century policing organization, just about 6 months prior. And I saw an opportunity, because time, especially for a chief, is so often limited. You're pulled so many different directions. So taking the time to write a report like this, I didn't feel that I had before, and I didn't have staff available to do it. Well, I had to do it as an assignment. So I decided, well, I'm going to take this to the next level and do more than is required for the assignment. And so I was able to put together a comprehensive report to the community on 21st century policing that we actually had professionally printed, and so available both in the printed version and digitally, that we were able to share with our community at actually a very timely moment in our department's history as well, because right before we released it, we got hit with an internal scandal, so to speak, that was very painful for the department to go through, and a lot of the work that we'd done to build trust in the community had been damaged, at least in some people's eyes. And here was an opportunity to say, hey, look, the actions of a very few don't reflect the whole culture of the department and the people that we have working here. And so we were able to show all the things that we'd done through the last 5 years or so that met those 6 pillars, including trust and transparency.
Yeah, and that's such foundational, and the fact that you can leverage what you were doing in the LEPSL program and to apply it, and so that your community can see you're building legitimacy and trust and education and training and using social media and technology and just all those pillars and combining them to say, this is what we do, but to have it done at the high level academics and then presented to them, that's not something most chiefs would have been able to do. So I think that's awesome.
Yeah, it was a lot of work, but it was very much worth it. And it was an amazing class as well. And again, that real world application that we talked about was just ideal. The timing was great. And, so many policing agencies do incredible work, and we're not always been historically the best at tooting our own horns, so to speak, in sharing with the community the good things that happen every day that sometimes we take for granted, whether they're single acts by an officer or a dispatcher or a professional staff member that go unheralded and unseen, or important programs and work that agencies are doing in their communities and also internally within the departments.
Yeah, I agree. And that being able to self-promote and share that and create the image that exists, but that, again, doesn't get traction in the media because it's not negative. And that's sadly what sells oftentimes. And one of the things to be able to promote an agency is to be able to articulate that and write well. And you are recognized, I know you're probably quite modest, but a little boasting moment for you is that you're recognized as one of the best writers to have come through the University of San Diego's LEPSL program. And writing to me is one of the most important skills because it really highlights what a person does, what their capabilities are, and it allows them to express themselves in probably, the most accurate way possible. Can you just share with the listeners and viewers, and maybe some of them are thinking of their masters, or some of them are in it, or maybe just somewhere along the path, how you honed your writing skills to such a great degree?
Well, I have an uneasy relationship with writing some because I hate it in some elements. I had no idea when we went into policing we would have to write so much, and it's part of your daily existence. And so a lot of experience, obviously, though, writing police reports is markedly different than writing academic papers in many ways. So a big part of it was just the effort, taking the extra time, sometimes wrestling over individual words or sentences to get exactly the message I'm trying to get across in a way that I felt was clear but concise and fluid. And so time and effort, frankly, the program made me better. One of my first classes, we would have an assignment where we had to write a professional memo on a topic, and there was a steep a word count limit. It was something like 500 words. And trying to answer the questions, and I tend to be a more detail-oriented person, in under that many words, or there was some penalties in your grade, was difficult. And so I might be at 1,800 words when I write my first draft, and I have to get that down to a few hundred. And that was a huge challenge, but it taught me to be a better writer, to be more clear and concise, and to get rid of unnecessary words and information. And so that was a big part of that as well. So again, just making the effort and the point to try to write the best papers that I could. And that did mean a lot of extra hours at times, and listening to the feedback from the instructors. You get personal, individualized feedback on every assignment that you turn in the LEPSL program. I learned a lot from professors, including Dr. Fritzvold and others. And so that was part of that as well. I also encourage people to use the tools that are available. Grammarly, you can buy a subscription to that, so you get the full version of that software, is highly recommended, or another one like it, because it really will help you hone your craft, from everything from using active voice over passive to grammar and punctuation errors, maybe sentence structure, clarity, things like that. I'll even check for plagiarism, which is a huge thing in the academic world. Be very careful that you're appropriately citing your sources. And that was a big part of the success as well. It was worth the money for an annual subscription to that.
Yeah, and as a instructor in the program, I look at the writing as such a key element because, like you said, it has to be concise, but it has to be concise because whether someone in law enforcement is writing a report, an important email, if they're a chief and they're writing compiling a year-end report, an executive summary on an incident, it has to express what you want it to express. And like you said, the sentence structure has to be solid, the syntax, the grammar, everything. And if it isn't, you could be the most best at your job, but if you can't express it correctly, people won't see that. And you were able to do that academically very well.
Yeah, first impressions are really important, and the most important, and that includes with your written work. Someone's not liking what they're reading or don't get why this is important to me and I need to pay attention and read to the end from the very beginning, they'll either just skim through what you wrote or maybe not read it at all. In our profession, that could mean not having a very important budget request approved, or some other program or initiative that you want to do, and so the cost can be very high for poor writing. And so making sure those opening sentences set up the section to follow is extremely important. And it's graduate school, so you want to go rich in citing empirical evidence and sources to back up what you're writing about and the points you're trying to make. Also, you're expected, don't just rehash what someone else essentially wrote. You're expected to have your own ideas and your own take on things, and to kind of show that logical thinking on whatever the subject is. And so making it your own is another key tip when you're doing these assignments.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you on a professional level, but I already know the answer because I read one of the passages you wrote when you were retiring, and it was even commented by the source that put it. It was just your thank you for the community, and it was just worded so well, and it was so poignant that it just expressed. It was something short, but it was just basically your sign-off message for your years of service. And so whether it's something long like an essay for a graduate master's program, or something as important as a message as you're about to retire, it shows through your writing. And so I think that's just remarkable how you were not only able to do that, but my next question, you were able to create a tips and like a guide for people. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So I was invited to some video thing that along with another fellow student for, I think it was a similar to this, but it was live, and incoming new students would participate. And Dr. Fritzbold wanted a couple of veteran students to be able to come in and share some of the lessons that they learned. And so about an hour or so before we were due to go live, I just threw together some bullet points of some thoughts that I'd learned, that I'd been thinking about through the program, that helped me, things I learned from other students by asking, and from the instructors, and had the opportunity to share them with others. And so hopefully people find them useful. And then I shared that in a PDF, I believe, so that it might be going around a little bit. But I just talked about some of the writing tips, the organizational tips, remembering that there's a capstone project in your last couple of months of the program, and how the more preparation you do throughout the program to prepare for that, knowing that the capstone's coming, the easier that will be, that process at the end, and the better your product will be. So I had some advice about that as well with the program. Again, I talked about the organizational systems. For me personally, I like to have organized digital folders for each module and each course, that I would put the assignments and the syllabus and other important information into those that help with the process. And I also like to print many of the documents, because I like to highlight and read, and maybe read them on the couch instead of sitting at a computer screen. And so I had those backup paper folders also. Those are just things that help keep me organized. The module materials in the LEPSL program become available usually the Friday before the start of a new module, which is every Tuesday. And so I would start making these copies and printing copies and saving digital files onto my computer, again, in case the internet went down, usually a couple days before the next module started. And again, that organization helped me. I'd keep copies of the instructor comments so I could remember 3 classes later the advice I got on how to write better. I'd make sure that I added the feedback they gave me, an edited version of my final papers, because that again helps with the capstone course. And we can talk about this for a long time. But it's just common things like that. And I also solicited advice from other students, emailed them, hey, do you have any tips and hints? I did that early on, and I got some great advice.
Yeah. So, if you break it all down, we're really looking at tight organization, attention to detail, understanding to make things succinct and paring things down. It's almost like, sculpting with clay. The final product is when you remove a lot of the unnecessary materials. And that's really like writing as well, because there's so much things that really detract from the quality of a final product. And when you, like, gave the example, you might strip down an 1,800 word paper to get that 500 words. Those 500 words, every word matters. And that's just how it has to be, because there's so much power in that. And I hope that the listeners and viewers just take a few things of those kind of broad concepts of the organization and the detail, and just really trying to be succinct, and obviously all the tips and recommendations that will make someone, I think, a good writer or help them evolve.
Right. Things like that, you might not think of it, but every new course has a syllabus that covers all that 7 of the modules. And so, man, print a copy of that. Take the time to read it from day one and see where the course is building towards by the time you get to the final module, because that will help you inform and have you thinking in advance about different topics you might be asked to choose to do an assignment about. And so having that global view from day one, I think, is really important for any student's success in any program.
Completely agree. And, as we're wrapping things up, I have a couple more questions. One of them, 24 years in law enforcement, the last 4 as a chief, during some really, really tough times. What do you think stands out to you the most as to some of the evolution of the profession in, 2.5 decades that you saw, in terms of the ability to serve your respective communities? What are the changes that are good? What are some of the trajectory you think that the profession needs to continue evolving at a faster rate?
Yeah, we have some serious challenges right now, certainly with recruiting and retention, which are 2 different things, but somewhat related. And that's going to be one of the biggest challenges continuing for the foreseeable future, from my perspective. And so that's we could spend a whole, one of these sessions talking just about that. But it's kind of scary. Like I was telling you offline, that I started instructing at our local police academy. That academy would typically have 40 to 45 cadets in it, and they would have to turn people away historically because there wasn't space. The last academy had 17. This one started out with about that number, and they're down to 13 right now. And so it's just been very difficult at this moment in time to get people to come into the profession of law enforcement. And so we're going to have to overcome that. In terms of looking historically, obviously, social media has had a wide-ranging and massive impact on policing. Things that maybe would only be known in a limited scope. Let's say it's an act of officer misconduct. Today is instantaneously transmitted worldwide, and you could have hundreds of millions of people weighing in their opinion. And these stories have a way of taking on a life of their own. You don't have time to catch up with a carefully worded news release, the next day at times. Sometimes you've got to get something out right now today before people fill the gaps, information gaps, with their own narrative. And that takes a life of its own that's almost impossible to retract. It becomes the truth. And so we have to learn. In fact, that's one of the courses in the LEPSL program, is on communication for law enforcement public safety leaders. And it talks about this subject. But that's been one of the key changes. Technology is progressing at a rate that is outpacing the laws, rules, regulations, and policies in place to make sure we safeguard and appropriately use that technology. That's a big challenge, to stay in front of that and current, to be aware of privacy rights and laws and other considerations before you choose to implement, let's say, a camera program in your community. And one of the examples was given in the program was the smart street lights in San Diego and the lessons learned there. Drones, biometric technology like facial recognition and DNA are all hot button topics still. And so, again, they're giving us law enforcement a plethora of amazing new tools to use, but we have to make sure we do those in balance. We keep the community informed, that we're, again, mindful and careful of the laws that are in place and constitutional rights that are impacted potentially by the implementation of these technologies. And so those are just 2-3 of the areas right off the top. Nothing new there, so to speak, but they're going to continue to be challenges for us, but also opportunities in those challenges.
Yeah, for sure. Every opportunity does bring its, or every challenge does bring its opportunities, but the benefit generally goes to the person who's more prepared and able to think critically and able to, bring forth experience. So I think it'll continue to change. I think, the program is definitely setting every law enforcement leader up for success, or giving them the highest probability of success for the reasons you mentioned. As we're winding down, Chief, from a leadership perspective, if you have a couple of pieces of advice for people who maybe that's their aspiration to be a chief, maybe they don't want to be a chief, but the way it's going now, they may be the last person standing and they're it, and they now have to assume that top role. Who knows? What advice would you give to the listeners and viewers, and or any leadership-based books that you would recommend? Advice and or books.
Well, we'll start with the advice. Like we were talking about earlier, you might be sitting in a position at your department right now where becoming chief of police or assistant chief or a captain is the last thing on your mind, but life has a way of changing. You might have an experience, it might be a school or training you go to, where suddenly you have a different perspective on the future. And so first thing I'd encourage people to do is prepare now. Don't wait until later. So if you believe, that a college degree or a graduate degree like the LEPSL program could help prepare you for whatever it is in your future career or in a second career, don't wait till the last minute to do that. Go ahead and start working on that now. You'll be glad that you did. We mentioned it earlier, but again, it's important to have the mindset of being a lifelong learner and looking for every opportunity that comes along, every experience, but it's positive, it's negative, it's a mistake you've made or others have made, learn from those. And, spend some time thinking about what went right, what went wrong, how can this have been done better? How am I personally accountable for what happened? Again, negative or positive. And again, what can I learn from that? And so those are just a few of the tips that I would give. And part of the lifelong learning, that could be college. That could be books like we were talking about. And there's so many, my mind's probably going to blank on some of those, but I'll try to throw a couple out here in a sec. Find a mentor, talk to people. You can learn from people at every level of your agency or your department or your work. From somebody that just started last week, will probably have some life experience you can learn from, to the longest serving person may have valuable advice, because no one person has all the answers. And so just be humble, go through life with your eyes and your mind wide open, and constantly seek to learn and to improve and to do better. Don't live a B life if you have the potential to be an A person, whether that's your grades in school or, try to excel whatever you do. There's 3 words of advice that I used a lot as chief, that the famous college football coach Lou Holtz used to say, 3 principles. He said, do the right thing, do the best that you can at whatever you put your hands to, and always treat people the way that you would want to be treated, the golden rule. And those are words to live and serve by. And so that will help set you up as well. And then finally, I mentioned this earlier, but when you're given a new opportunity, a new assignment, a new job, don't merely occupy that space and just get by, tread water, so to speak. Seek to elevate the position, the work that you've been given, and make it better. But do so humbly. And, it's not about finding praise for yourself. Give that praise to those you work beside and who work for you for the good work that they do, and let them see that example as well.
Amazing. To just consolidate, it's humility, compassion, lifelong learning. And I really liked your quotes from Lou Holtz, and I really think that sums up why you were a successful chief. I know Sarah's going to come in to close us out, but I just want to say, Chief, thank you for your service. Thanks for being part of this podcast and sharing your experiences and sharing with the listeners and viewers some some of the ways that they can, maybe help sculpt their career trajectory. And any final thoughts from you? Now's the time.
Right. I thought of one other thing when you were asking about those that are looking towards the next step, the next way that they can serve. And one other thought was just don't be afraid or hesitant to take on challenging opportunities and tasks. Like when I was thinking about promoting to captain, and I promoted to captain from sergeant, I started second guessing myself. I started, worrying about all the new responsibilities, what I didn't know. If I had never taken that opportunity and chose to stay where I'm comfortable, I never would have had the opportunities to ultimately retire as a chief, and so proud of the people that I had an opportunity to work beside and to lead. And so look for challenging opportunities outside your comfort zone, because you will learn and grow so much through those. You'll become stronger as a person as well and more resilient. So I strongly encourage that. Finally, I'll throw out one book that's not on your typical leadership list that I said I would. I don't want to close this out without that. Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. I had to read that in a course once, and it's just powerful and a lot about perspectives. He survived the Holocaust and concentration camps, and he has some pretty profound lessons to share about resiliency and the will to live and a lot of other important topics. So I'll just throw that one out. Thank you both for having me as your guest. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And what a way to close. And I have read that book, and it will definitely change a person's perspective once they read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. And thank you, Chief Watson. Sarah, thanks for getting this all together, and we'll turn it back over to you to close us out.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you both so much for your time today. And we appreciate you taking the time. To our viewers, we appreciate you taking the time out of your day to meet the law enforcement heroes and leaders who are part of the MS LEPSL family. If you'd like to watch previous episodes of Blue Leadership, you can find them on the video tab of your Facebook page or by searching USD Blue Leadership on YouTube. Thanks, everyone, and we'll see you next time.